Margaret M. Anselmo was a lifelong Spokane, Washington resident. She grew up in the city, graduating from Merc High School and later studying banking at Spokane Community College. She worked locally as a much-beloved floral designer. By the mid-1990s, she was a 45-year-old wife and mother to 2 children. Margaret's family knew her as nothing but doting and caring. Her daughter Lisa would later describe her as, quote, a beautiful and loving mom. Those who recall her remember her cascading dark hair and deep brown eyes. In her private life, Margaret had been weathering personal struggles, but her family members emphasized that she doted on her children and was always attentive and nurturing. On the afternoon of January 2nd, 1997, Margaret left her apartment in order to cash a check at a local store. What happened next remains largely unknown. However, we know she never returned home that day. The next day, a delivery driver was navigating a snowy alley on the industrial fringes of downtown Spokane, Washington. This location was desolate, a transient space located near 1714 East Pacific Avenue. The driver's attention was drawn to something out of place, a shape huddled beneath an abandoned semi-trailer. Upon approaching, the driver discovered a person laying face down in the snow. He checked for signs of life, but found none, and he immediately notified police. The victim was soon identified as Margaret Anselmo. Crime scene investigators found that Margaret had been brutally beaten and sexually assaulted. The Spokane medical examiner later ruled her death a homicide caused by blunt force trauma to the head. Police initially had little to go on. The crime appeared random. Margaret's purse was found with cash still inside, so robbery did not seem to be a motive, and no witnesses reported seeing anything suspicious. Authorities described the killing at first as a, quote, apparent random act of violence. It was their way of saying that Margaret had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Detectives collected biological evidence from her body, including semen, and securely stored it. From this biological evidence, a traditional STR DNA profile of the unknown suspect was developed. In the late 1990s, this was a powerful tool. The profile was uploaded to the FBI's burgeoning Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS. This was a database designed to match crime scene DNA against a registry of known offenders. However, no matches were found. With no witnesses and no forensic leads, their traditional detective work hit a dead end, and Margaret's case went cold. The mystery endured until advances in forensic science offered new hope. In 2022, Spokane Police Detective Sergeant Zach Stormont reopened Margaret's case using forensic genetic genealogy. He sent the crime scene DNA to Othram Incorporated, a private lab in Texas, where scientists used advanced genomic sequencing in order to build a comprehensive DNA profile of the unknown suspect. Genealogists then compared that profile to public DNA databases in order to search for relatives. Over several months, the genetic work pointed to one family. Investigators identified 2 individuals whose DNA had a precise familial relationship to the crime scene sample. One person was the biological child of the suspect, and another was a half-sibling. The only man fitting that genetic criteria was Brian James Anderson, of rural Pend Oriole County, Washington. Anderson was born in 1976, and at the time of Margaret's killing would have been just 20 years old. His obituary and public records show that he lived a life that Margaret was never allowed to live. He had since gotten married, had 2 children, and had a career. Brian worked at a local hardware store. Spokane police announced that all evidence linked Anderson to the 1997 crime. Having finally identified their suspect after 28 years, investigators hit one last immutable wall. Brian James Anderson could not be tried as he was deceased by his own hand. He had died by suicide on July 8, 2009, 12 years after he murdered Margaret Anselmo. He was 33 years old. A spokesperson for the investigators said that if Anderson were alive today, they would have charged him with first-degree murder, in addition to first-degree rape. For Margaret's surviving family, the identification brought a measure of closure. Before we dive into our next case, I wanted to talk about something I had never previously thought about. How we show up in a space matters, especially when you've been talking about the kind of dark topics that we discuss here on this channel. Recently, I've been exploring different fragrances to complement various occasions. However, committing to a full-sized bottle without knowing if it's the right fit can be daunting. That's where Scentbird comes in. It's a monthly subscription service that allows you to choose from over 900 authentic designer and niche fragrances. Each month, you'll receive an 8 milliliter vial, which lasts you about 30 days, enough to find the scent that resonates with you. Lately, I've been trying Memo Palice Itak, and I found it perfect for date nights, with notes of sultry cedarwood and romantic bergamot. And for everyday wear, I'm loving Portals Parfums Earthly Abundance, which has my absolute favorite scent, jasmine, mixed with green tea and turmeric. It's quickly becoming my new signature daily fragrance. If you've been looking to upgrade how you show up in your space, try Scentbird today. Your first scent is just $8.97 using the promo code MTrueCrime, or you could scan the QR code below. After that, your next fragrance is just $17.95. Again, use the promo code MTrueCrime or scan the QR code below. Thank you so much to Scentbird for sponsoring this video. Catherine Conley was just 17 years old in June of 1979. Known as Kathy to her friends, she was not only a budding adult coming of age in the ever-changing socio-political landscape of the late 70s, she was also a new mom. She lived with her infant daughter, Naomi, and other family members at a home on Windsor Street in Marion, Ohio. Those close to her say Catherine was a devoted mother. On the evening of June 1st, Catherine left home around 8:45 p.m., leaving 6-month-old Naomi with family in order to buy baby formula from a local Kroger grocery store. She never returned. It wasn't until the 3rd of June, after she failed to return home, that her family finally filed a missing persons report with the Marion Police Department. The Marion Star subsequently published a notice of her disappearance on June 14th. The morning after the Star article went out, around 9 a.m., however, Catherine's partially decomposed body was found by Eric Anthony in a hedgerow between two of his family's fields. Her corpse was located 15 miles away from her home in Morrow County, near the intersection of County Road 9 and County Road 131, about a mile north of the village of Edison. Local and state investigators quickly became involved. Authorities sent the body to Cincinnati for a full autopsy. The medical examiner had to identify Kathy's decomposing body by her dental records, and later determined that she had been beaten to death, suffering severe blunt force trauma to the skull. Law enforcement from multiple agencies, the Marion Police Department, the Morrow County Sheriff's Office, and Ohio's Bureau of Criminal Investigation, then examined the crime scene and followed up on any leads. Detectives interviewed witnesses and employees at the Kroger store on Main Street, but nobody claimed to have seen anything. However, in Morrow County, a farmer reported something unusual. He had seen a strange vehicle with a single occupant in the exact field where Kathy's body was later found. Locals state that back then, the location had a reputation for being a makeout spot for teens and others, so they say it was not out of the ordinary to see couples back there. However, it was strange, according to the witness, to see a solitary person there, and as such, he wisely jotted down the license plate number on a scrap of paper. However, sadly, that note was lost before it could be turned over to police, and the witness could not provide a description of the vehicle or any further information that was of use. Without that crucial lead, the investigation stalled. Just days after the discovery of her body, Catherine was laid to rest at Chapel Heights Memory Gardens, about 3 miles north of Marion. Her newborn daughter, her mother Margaret, her grandmother Maud, and her siblings and their extended family together mourned her untimely death. In the weeks and months that followed, Catherine's family was left with no answers and few leads. No arrests were made in 1979, nor the decades that followed, and the investigation eventually went dormant. Then, more than 45 years later, everything changed. In 2025, the Morrow County Sheriff's Office quietly reopened the file. Detective Brandon Newsom began combing through old reports, re-interviewing witnesses, and re-evaluating overlooked evidence. His breakthrough came when he uncovered a long-forgotten letter written in 1979 by a prime suspect, Dana Slane. In the letter, sent to a friend shortly after Catherine's murder, Slane confessed to killing her and complained that law enforcement, quote, was aware of his involvement, but, quote, lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. Although the newspapers at the time never reported on it, investigators had questioned Slane in connection with the murder. Slane was known to frequent the Marion City parking lot at South Prospect Street and West Church Street, a popular gathering and makeout spot for local teenagers. Before his alleged involvement in Catherine's death, his criminal record included minor offenses, mostly in the realm of disorderly conduct. But his behavior escalated sharply in August of 1979, when he was arrested by Marion police and charged with 2 counts of gross sexual imposition. This was just 2 months after Catherine's murder. According to the arrest report, Slane had picked up a 20-year-old woman and a 17-year-old girl from the same parking lot and drove off with them. One of the victims managed to alert authorities, and officers stopped his vehicle on Cardington Road. The following year, Slane's troubles with the law intensified. He was arrested around 7 times for disorderly conduct, public intoxication, and obstructing official business. In 2025, Detective Newsom eventually located the friend who had received Slane's confession letter. After years of silence, this individual confirmed that Slane had also revealed details of Catherine's murder during their prison visits. Those details aligned with the description given decades earlier by a witness who had seen Kathy with a man on the night she disappeared, placing Slane squarely at the scene. With both the written confession and the witness testimony finally secured, prosecutors had what they needed. In September of 2025, a Morrow County grand jury indicted Dana Slane for the murder of Catherine Conley. However, Slane himself would never stand trial, as he had died in prison in 2019 from unrelated causes. Even so, the indictment marked a milestone for Catherine's family and for investigators who had carried the case with them for nearly half a century. Catherine's daughter, Naomi, who was only 6 months old when her mother was killed, issued a short public statement after the announcement. She expressed gratitude for Detective Newsom and everyone who refused to let the case fade away. And she spoke about holding on to hope that more of the truth might still surface. For almost 50 years, Kathy's death had cast a long shadow over the Conley family. Now, even though justice could not be served in court, her story had finally been brought to light, and her murder was no longer an unsolved and forgotten tragedy. Teresa Fusco was a 16-year-old high school junior living in Lynbrook, a tight-knit community on Long Island's South Shore. In November of 1984, she was a student of East Rockaway High School and lived on Windsor Place with her mother, Connie Napoli, and her brother, Michael. Her parents were divorced, and her father, Thomas Fusco, lived nearby in Queens. To help support herself and save money, Teresa worked part-time at the snack bar of Hot Skates, a popular roller skating rink on Merc Road in Lynbrook. The venue was a beloved hangout for local teenagers in the mid-1980s, a place where teens gathered on Friday and Saturday nights to skate under disco lights and loud music. For Teresa, it was just a part-time gig, 1 night a week, helping her move a tiny bit closer to her dreams. By all accounts, Teresa was a vibrant teenager who possessed wondrous aspirations. Her mother described her as someone full of life, who dreamed of becoming a professional dancer, who someday would light up stages beyond the small roller rinks of Long Island. Teresa took ballet and tap dance classes twice a week, and would always talk about her future in performance. Friends and family remembered her as a popular, bright young woman who was not the type to ever run away from home. Before leaving for work around 5:30 p.m. on the evening of November 10th, Teresa began packing her suitcase, preparing her belongings in order to visit her father the following day. Her upcoming work shift would be routine, or so she thought. According to subsequent witness accounts, Teresa had a disagreement with an assistant manager over the course of her shift and was fired from her position at the snack bar. At 9:47 p.m., Teresa clocked out of her job for the final time. Witnesses reported seeing her leave the roller rink in tears, visibly upset and embarrassed by what had just happened. It wasn't until 2012 that the owner of Hot Skates revealed more information about that night, saying that shortly after Teresa clocked out of work, she made a phone call from the roller rink, although it remains unclear to whom she was speaking. Her home was only 4 blocks away from Hot Skates, a short walk through the brisk November night, and while Teresa did begin that walk, she never arrived home. When Teresa failed to return that night, her mother Connie recalls that initially she wasn't alarmed. She says the teenager had begun spending evenings with a coworker, and some sources indicate that Teresa had mentioned she might stay at her friend Lisa's home. It wasn't until the next morning, when Connie discovered that Teresa's bed was untouched and her suitcase still remained, that panic set in. A call to Lisa confirmed her fears. Teresa had never arrived. Connie immediately reported her daughter missing, launching what would become every parent's worst nightmare. For nearly a month, the Fusco family endured agonizing uncertainty. The initial police response was troubling, with some officers assuming Teresa had simply run away because she had been fired from her job and had left the rink in tears. But those who knew Teresa insisted this was impossible. She was not a runaway. She had laid out clothes for the next day, had plans to visit her father, and all of her personal belongings remained at home. During those terrible weeks, Connie Fusco suffered additional cruelty. She received numerous prank calls from people mocking her anguish with false leads. One particularly disturbing caller, impersonating Teresa herself, said, quote, "Help me, mommy. Help, mommy. I'm suffocating." These words would later take on an even darker significance, given what was to come. On December 5th, 1984, nearly a month after Teresa had vanished, 2 14-year-old boys were playing in a wooded area north of the Long Island Railroad tracks, between Rockland Avenue and Park Place, essentially just 1 block from Teresa's place of work. There, they made a devastating discovery. Teresa's unclothed body was found covered with leaves and wooden shipping pallets. Discarded like mere trash, she was located in a wooded area barely 5 blocks from her home and approximately 1 block from where she had last been seen. Her body bore signs of severe beating, and the medical examiner determined she had been sexually assaulted and strangled with a ligature, likely a nylon rope. Evidence suggested that she had been killed shortly after her disappearance, probably on the very night she went missing. The murder sent shockwaves through the Lynbrook community and created an overall atmosphere of fear. The timing was particularly unsettling because Teresa's disappearance occurred during a period when 2 other teenage girls had also vanished from the same area. Kelly Morrissey, a 15-year-old friend of Teresa's, had disappeared in June of 1984 and was never found. Just months after Teresa's body was discovered, another young woman, 19-year-old Jacqueline Martorella, disappeared in March of 1985 while walking to work at a nearby Burger King. Her body was found in April of 1985, also strangled. These 3 cases became known locally as the Lynbrook Triangle. In the immediate aftermath of Teresa's disappearance, there was a potentially critical piece of evidence that many with knowledge of the case say should have been pursued more aggressively. The night that Teresa went missing, a man named John French reported that his tan Oldsmobile had been stolen. The car had been parked less than a mile from Hot Skates and was taken sometime between 9:30 p.m. and 11:05 p.m., the exact time window when Teresa vanished. When French found his car about a week later, approximately 1.5 miles away, or 2.4 kilometers, in neighboring Lakeview, he made a disturbing discovery. The windshield was smashed, and the license plate had been changed. His sister later found a pair of striped women's jeans under the passenger seat, with one leg turned inside out, as if it had been pulled off. Teresa's mother had told detectives her daughter had been wearing striped blue jeans when she went missing, and a nylon rope that had been left in the back seat was now missing. French reported these findings to police, sensing a connection between the car theft and Teresa's disappearance. The car was processed, and according to lead detectives' handwritten notes, hair was found that was, quote, more than 50% similar to Teresa Fusco. French was shown a length of rope and other items from the crime scene, and he identified them as belonging to him. Incredibly, the rope was never tested for blood evidence and subsequently went missing. The jeans were, quote, discarded inadvertently, and it later emerged that this and other critical evidence appeared to have been withheld from prosecutors and investigators by the lead detective, Joseph Volpe. This suppression of evidence would have devastating consequences to the case. Under enormous pressure to solve the high-profile murder that had terrified the community, Nassau County detectives focused their investigation on 3 men: Dennis Halstead, John Coget, and John Restivo. All 3 had some connection to the Lynbrook area and were acquainted with Kelly Morrissey, the teenager who had disappeared just months before Teresa. In 1985, after intensive interrogation, John Coget signed a confession. This was the 6th version of facts he allegedly provided to the police, however. After more than 18 hours of interrogation, he gave a videotaped statement, which was handwritten by a detective, that implicated all 3 men being investigated in the abduction, rape, and murder of Teresa Fusco. Police searched John Restivo's van and claimed to have found hairs belonging to Teresa. John Coget was tried separately in 1980 for the alleged murder of Teresa and convicted, receiving a sentence of 31.5 years to life. Halstead and Restivo were tried together later that year and were convicted on the basis of Coget's confession, in addition to the alleged hair evidence from Restivo's van and testimony from so-called jailhouse informants. They were sentenced to 33 years to life. Throughout the trial, all 3 men steadfastly maintained their innocence. They had no alibis, no criminal records, except for Coget's nonviolent prior arrests, and insisted they had been framed through coerced confessions and unreliable testimony. Restivo read an 18-page letter in court asserting his innocence and his refusal to falsely confess. Their protestations fell on deaf ears, and they would spend the next 18 years behind bars for a crime they did not commit. There was one particularly troubling detail which should have given investigators pause. The 3rd woman to go missing, Jacqueline Martorella, disappeared in March and was murdered in April of 1985, after all 3 men had already been arrested and were in custody or under surveillance. She was killed using the exact same method as Teresa: ligature strangulation, sexual assault, and her body being dumped and hidden. The killer was clearly still active by the time of trial, yet the wrongful convictions proceeded anyway. For nearly 2 decades, Dennis Halstead, John Coget, and John Restivo fought to prove their innocence from behind prison walls. In the 1990s, as DNA technology advanced, preliminary testing began to cast serious doubts on their convictions. However, a judge initially deemed these early tests not reliable enough to overturn the convictions, and the men remained incarcerated. In 2002, attorney Nina Morrison of the Innocence Project took on their case and made a breakthrough discovery. She found an intact vaginal swab from Teresa's autopsy that had never been properly analyzed with modern DNA technology. This evidence became the key to the 3 men's freedom. In 2003, advanced DNA testing was performed on the semen found on Teresa's body. The results were definitive. The DNA did not match any of the 3 convicted men. The semen belonged to an unknown assailant, and after spending nearly 18 years in prison for a crime they did not commit, all 3 men were finally released in June of 2003. The Nassau County District Attorney's Office faced a decision whether to retry the men or not. John Kogut was retried in 2005, this time before Judge Victor M. Ort in a bench trial, as opposed to a jury trial. After 3 months of testimony and examination of the evidence with modern forensic analysis, Judge Ort found Kogut not guilty on all counts in December of 2005. The judge specifically found that numerous aspects of the confession were contradicted by DNA and other forensic evidence, and that the decomposed hairs, supposedly from Teresa, were never actually found in Restivo's van. Within a week of Kogut's acquittal, prosecutors dropped all charges against Dennis Halstead and John Restivo. Assistant Nassau County District Attorney Fred Klein acknowledged in court that he could not prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The 3 exonerated men subsequently filed civil lawsuits for wrongful imprisonment. In 2014, a federal jury awarded Dennis Halstead and John Restivo $18 million each, essentially $1 million for every year they spent wrongfully incarcerated. The jury also found that Detective Joseph Flope had fabricated hair evidence by planting hairs from Teresa's head in John Restivo's van, and that he deliberately hid evidence that proved the 3 men's innocence. John Kogut received $1.5 million from the New York Court of Claims. But while justice had been served for the wrongly convicted men, a painful question remained: who actually killed Teresa Fusco? The case went cold, becoming one of Nassau County's most haunting unsolved murders. Then, in 2023, the Nassau County Office of the Medical Examiner and the FBI submitted the 40-year-old evidence to Othram Incorporated, a private genealogy lab in Texas. Othram scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing in order to build a comprehensive DNA profile from the evidence. The genealogical map was then given to the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy Team, also known as the FGG. The FGG used genealogical databases to build a family tree for the unknown suspect, generating new investigative leads. The new investigation pointed to one man, Richard Bilodeau. For months, they watched and waited for the right opportunity to obtain a DNA sample without alerting their suspect. The break came in February of 2024, when Bilodeau visited a tropical smoothie cafe not far from his home in Center Moriches. Long Island. After he discarded his smoothie cup and straw in the trash, investigators retrieved them. The straw was brought to the FBI laboratory for DNA testing. When the results came back, it showed a 100% match to the semen sample taken from Teresa Fusco's body in 1984. After 41 years, science had finally identified Teresa's killer. On October 14, 2025, Nassau County authorities arrested Richard Bilodeau. Now 63 years old, still living in Center Moriches. At the time of his arrest, Bilodeau was living alone and working night shifts stocking shelves at a local Walmart. He had no known criminal record and had seemingly lived a quiet and unremarkable life for 4 decades. Detectives found that in 1984, Bilodeau had been a 23-year-old living with his grandparents in Lynbrook on Treadwell Avenue, just 1 mile from Hot Skates, also just 1 mile from where Teresa Fusco lived, and about 1 mile from where her body was found. According to prosecutors, he told investigators that he operated a mobile coffee truck in the area at the time. None of Teresa's friends or family members recalled any connection between Bilodeau and the teenager. He had lived in the shadows, just another face in the community, while 3 innocent men went to prison and a grieving family searched desperately for answers. When investigators confronted Bilodeau about the DNA match, his response was chilling. According to prosecutors, he denied knowing Teresa, but made what District Attorney Ann Donnelly called, quote, a flippant comment about the 1980s. He said, quote, people got away with murder back then. District Attorney Donnelly responded at the press conference, saying, quote, well, let me tell you something, Mr. Bilodeau. It's 2025, and I got you now. On October 15, 2025, Richard Bilodeau was arraigned before Judge Helene Gergerty on 2 counts of second-degree murder, one for intentional murder and one for a murder committed during the course of a rape. He pleaded not guilty and was remained to the Nassau County Jail without bail. If convicted, he faces up to 25 years to life in prison and is scheduled to return to court on November 21, 2025. The murder of Teresa Fusco became more than just a single tragedy. It represented multiple failures of the American justice system. Detective Joseph Flope, who had led the original investigation, was found to have fabricated evidence and withheld exculpatory information. He has since passed away. His actions cost 3 innocent men nearly 2 decades of their lives and allowed Teresa's actual killer to remain free for an additional 41 years. For the Lynbrook community, the arrest brought a measure of closure to a case that had haunted the area for over 4 decades. The Lynbrook triangle of disappearances in 1984 and 1985 still holds unanswered questions. Kelly Morrissey's body was never found, and Jacqueline Martorella's murder remains unsolved. But at least one less family questions who took their loved one away from them. Teresa's mother, Connie Napoli, died in 2019 without ever seeing justice served for her daughter. At the press conference, Teresa's father, Thomas Fusco, now elderly and relying on a cane, pulled out the photograph that he had kept with him for more than 40 years. With his voice trembling, he said, quote, "I loved her and I miss her. She lives in my heart. It's heartbreaking to go through this over and over again. But this seems like a finalization. I'm very grateful. I never gave up hope. I've always had faith in the system." A big thanks to Scentbird for sponsoring this video. Check them out by scanning the QR code on screen or by using the promo code MTrueCrime to get 55% off your first box.